The iGaming Daily podcast presents an exclusive two-part series with global gambling consultancy 4H Agency on the ongoing development and outlook of Eastern European and Central European markets. Providing on-the-ground insights, 4H Agency has become the leading intelligence provider covering regulatory developments and disruptions of Europe's youngest market. 4H Agency guides iGaming Daily audiences through the current affairs of Eastern Europe and Central European markets and how these developments are shaping the competitive dynamics of global gambling industry as a whole. I'm Ted Menmuir, and joining me today is Ilya Machavariani, founder and CEO of 4H Agency. Ilya, how are you doing?
Thank you, Ted. Amazing. Thanks for having me, and hello everyone who is tuning in to this podcast. It's amazing opportunity to be here, and I am really excited to speak about Eastern Europe, speak about Central Europe, and try and guide SBC audience within intricacies of the regulations of these markets.
Okay. So, let's start by speaking about you and why. I think we first met contact when I think you were working in London, and we came across kind of your work covering kind of Eastern markets. But at the time, I think you were working for a London practice. And what kind of led you to found 4H?
Well, first we need to guide the audience through the intricacies of my personality, my past life. Yeah, well, my journey to founding 4H and generally towards the gambling industries, I would say, not that conventional in a way, because I'm a lawyer by trade, and I was working for the international law firm called Dentons, which at the time was the largest international law firm in the world in terms of headcount. So they let anyone there, and they decided to hire me as well. So within the firm, I was initially doing some corporate and M&A work. But in the meantime, I started to accept different projects from the clients who originate from the gambling industry. And for some reason, I don't know, by this day, I don't understand why, but for some reason it started to work for me. And after one client, I got another one, and soon enough, my bosses and myself, we decided to establish an Eastern European gambling practice within the firm. So this was my employment when we met with you, Ted, in 2018, I guess. So since I started to do this work within Dentons, myself and my other partner Ivan, we quickly realized that probably like the whole context of international law firm, it's not the best suited for the wider gambling industry. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, like big ones, our big operators within the industry, they obviously employ services of different law firms, consulting firms, and they know how this works. But when it comes to, I would say, middle to like small-sized industry businesses, they were, and to some extent even are, not really familiar with how consulting works. So when I started to try and speak with people about how like a huge law firm can help them, they either didn't really understand why they need to pay a lot of money to someone outside of their company, or they asked for some additional angles of advisory business consultancy that law firm wasn't able to provide. So the final straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, was the start of legalization in Ukraine, because like you remember the time that Ukraine was in the spotlight of the industry, and everybody was looking to understand how to work in this market, how to enter the market, what's going on, and what's going to happen. So when it started in around 2020, we decided to spin off from the firm and set up our own consulting agency that will be able to work with a wider array of clients, and in the same time would be able to offer a wider array of services to the industry, which in the past law firm was constraining us to provide. So in short, like this was the idea of how we came to founding 4H, and how we started to pave our way within the industry and try to find our place under the sun.
One of the dynamic elements of the 4H is your focus on intelligence and granular intelligence. I mean, actually, like putting in the local thought of the market, what the consumer views, and what the regulator is actually going under or proceeding with. And can you tell us kind of that importance for you to kind of provide that asset to the industry to say, look, there are so many kind of localized components that you have to understand for each market?
Yeah, sure. This is, I like to speak about this topic, to be honest with you. Like generally, I would say that the answer is twofold. The first part is obviously like everybody's speaking about that. The localization is key. You need to understand local specifics, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Everybody knows that. But the other part, which is, in my experience, is much more important and which proved like detrimental in terms of our success for us, very important part is that when we started to work with global gambling brands, and on with regard to these markets, with regard to Ukraine, with regard to Georgia, at the time, with regard to Russia, to Belarus, to Kazakhstan, we realized that there is a huge gap of understanding between the global gambling clients and how they understand and how they look at the particular regulations, particular jurisdictions, and what is actually happening on the ground. And just to give you an example, this gap, it's so huge that even, for example, the particular definitions of different verticals were different.
Yeah.
And for example, like, I don't know, TED-Bet, which is working on like globally and everywhere, TED-Bet's top managers, they simply don't understand why, for example, I don't know, in Russia, online casino is banned and sports betting is allowed, and what is the difference from the eyes of Russian regulator, and how to look at it. So, and we decided to capitalize on that, and like the hypothesis is pretty simple, that if like 1 or 2 or 3 clients encountered the same issues when they try to understand particular market, when it's fair to say that probably everyone is in the same boat, and everyone has certain issues with attempting to get information, get intelligence, get knowledge, and most of all, like, intelligence and knowledge is good, like, don't get me wrong, but from my perspective and what time showed, that probably the most important thing is getting the actual understanding of how and where the market is heading, and how to approach the market in the right way. Because, like, again, I guess that everybody understands that, but let's take TED-Bet again, for example.
Please don't, because I think you're scaring my bosses. But no, I get it. Well,
I won't tell Rasmus about TED-Bet.
No.
So imagine TED-Bet is working like only in the EU. Like Malta, I don't know, maybe UKGC license, some, I don't know, tender operations in Spain. And obviously within the EU and EU adjacent countries and jurisdictions, regulatory frameworks are more or less like close to each other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that the definitions are the same, and generally the understanding of how the industry works is also pretty similar to between different countries. But when you are moving towards the east, and when you like encounter the countries of like former USSR influence, let's put it this way, they have a completely different, first of all, legal tradition in terms of like particular legal and regulatory tradition in terms of particular regulations. And they also have a particular way of governmental approach to different licensed industries within the jurisdiction. So, and this is where this gap gets bigger from each meter that you are going towards the east, because when you are working in Malta under like MGA governance and MGA oversight, this is one story. But when you come, for example, to Ukraine and you need to start communicating with Ukrainian regulator, the approach that you had towards MGA will not work in Ukraine, like for the simple reason that the background of each of two regulatory bodies is completely different. So this is where we come into play, and we try to bridge the understanding of like European and global gambling operation with the local specifics of particular markets. So this is what we're trying to do.
And I mean, look, that sounds like a huge endeavor, but can you explain? I mean, just how tough is it to analyze these markets and actually get these kind of nuggets of information out to kind of Western audiences for them to interpret? I mean, that must be very hard.
Well, I'm not going to lie. In the beginning, it was really a hard endeavor, especially the part where you need to, I would even use the word translate the information from these markets to the Western like language and level of comprehension. And I guess that like over the first couple of years, this was our primary task and primary goal. And the primary task that we spend our time on is to figure out how to explain local regulatory concepts and local specifics to the Western audiences in a way that Western audiences would comprehend. Because like usually people on the ground, and this is again why like probably our listeners and anyone who follows this podcast can ask a question like, okay, listen, why do I need to go to these guys when I can just like fly to Ukraine, and I can find like local people who will be happy to assist me in like local people with knowledge of English language and whatever, and who can assist me with like doing this kind of stuff. They can just provide me information and I will read this information and then I will proceed on this basis. But the issue here is that essentially local guys and local law firms, I don't know what not, local consultants, they can only do so much in a way that they are constrained by their localized presence. I don't know if this makes sense, because they still communicate with the Western audience in a way that they would communicate within their jurisdiction. So, for example, like how to put it, there is a good example from like, again, we were not working in Russia after the war, but nevertheless, this is a good example of what I'm talking about. In Russia, there is a concept of interactive bet. It's like, this is the way that it's called in the legislation. So, if you will, like in reality, interactive bet is basically the very tricky way to name online sports betting. So, like interactive betting, online sports betting, like, I don't know, maybe it makes sense for someone. So if you start speaking with local Russian law firms, for example, they will respond to you in terms and in a way that Russian legislation is drafted. So they will tell to the Western like client that, listen, the interactive bet regulation is the following. And when Western client will ask, listen, wait a sec, I want to understand what is interactive bet, they will tell like, this is interactive bet. What is the question? Like, what do you not understand? This is interactive bet. And this applies to practically any distant jurisdiction, because you need to have this general knowledge and general understanding of how industry works today. And you need to have exposure and you need to have experience with global companies and global brands in order to be able to speak with them on their language. So this is why we are still like afloat, and this is why we are still existing, because the value that we bring to the table is that when you try to expand into Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, and Kazakhstan, we can compose it in a way that your like top managers can understand after they try to furnish an expansion into Brazil, into Latin America, like, or anywhere else. So this is where we come in.
Okay, so Ilya, you've been great at kind of setting the context of Eastern European and Central European markets and what they're going under. We're just going to head into an ad break now, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the regulatory dynamics in EE markets. Now, let's talk about the Western Middle East and why. Look, Eastern Europe has become kind of a resource center for gambling, and it's come amid kind of a very disrupted decade. So can you tell me about kind of the interplays going on between Western gaming and Eastern gaming and how that's expanding in certain jurisdictions? You know, be it Georgia or um or the Balkans.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and this is also something that I like to think about, because like if like I know that you were attending like different industry trade shows, and like I'm sure that anyone tuning in also did the same, and you all guys probably noticed that I would say second or third language on any trade show is Russian language, closely followed by Ukrainian language, you know. And I guess this really shows how the West and East try to collaborate and communicate within the wider like gambling industry context, because everybody knows that Eastern Europe was a source of a lot of very skilled iGaming labor and very skilled iGaming managers and huge iGaming companies that operate all over the globe. Everybody knows them. 1xBet, OneWin, MostBet, ForaBet, like a lot of them. And in the same time, Eastern European markets, as markets, as a part of the industry, they during the past decade they presented a very interesting arena for expansion, because on one hand, people are really familiar with gambling industry because, again, of the prominence of local operators and the fact that generally, despite the USSR period, like gambling still was kind of near the general public, like for the last 100 years. So, and on the other hand, these markets posed an interesting arena for expansion because they were new in a way and not so saturated compared to European countries. So, and essentially, this was, and well, I guess still is, some kind of a battle between like huge Western companies that are like after 35 markets that they already expanded, like that bet, and and local guys who know their stuff and who know how to work like at home, and they decided not to expand towards the west, but they decided to go global instead. So I would say that the best example of such like battle and collaboration is Georgia, because it's like ultimate example here, because in Georgia we have 3 operators that are owned by 3 global gambling groups, like CrystalBet owned by Entain, Adjarabet owned by Flutter, and EuropaBet owned by Betson Group. And this is, I would say, the best example, and again, the model example of how West and East can work together, because what I like about this is that to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if someone from aforesaid companies are listening. To the best of my knowledge, the big parent companies, they are not really involving themselves in the local operations. So in Georgia, there are Georgian teams and Georgian brands that are continue to do their God's work in the country, but in the same time, they are owned by global gambling groups. So if for example, like obviously Ukraine was the core jurisdiction of the region, which was intended to become, I guess, an iGaming hub if it was not for the war. Yeah. So, and before the war, I was expecting that in 5 to 7 years we would see the same situation in Ukraine, where we would have like, I don't know, 4 or 5 local companies owned by global guys who want to have their piece of cake, and in the same time doesn't really want to intervene with anything local a lot.
Okay, and just my final question for part 1, and you know, you're talking about Western stakeholders wanting a piece of the cake in EE markets. But just to summarize, what is kind of the common misconception about EE markets that you see mostly from Western audiences?
When I follow different podcasts or different creators, some of them like to use this phrasing that if you remember one thing from this podcast, I want you to remember this. So I will say the same. If you remember one thing from this podcast, from this show, I want you to remember this, that the main misconception is understanding and expectation that project of expansion to any of Eastern European markets can be like one of the projects that you are doing. This is not the case. Because amount of localization, amount of liaising with local regulators and local stakeholders is so huge that you need to dedicate a separate team. You need to dedicate and allocate a lot of time and money and other resources to be able to enter these markets in a way that would not make you unhappy in the future. So this is very important to remember, that you really need to, I know like how global companies work. We have like this roadmap for this year. And in this roadmap, we have 25 countries that we need to consider and get the license and whatnot. But when it comes to Eastern Europe, one country can amount to, can use the same like amount of time and resources like 5 other countries in other parts of the globe. Because it's really complicated in the way that, for example, in Africa, the regulations are not really well developed, and the general situation in like African countries that like Nigeria or Kenya is that if you have like money and if you have like local access to the local network and local resources, it's fairly easy, I would say, to enter such markets and start operating legally over there. But when it comes to Eastern Europe, it's not the case, because Eastern European markets, they manage to like do a couple of steps towards like proper regulation. But these couple of steps creates additional context that you need to consider when you're entering this market. So this is like very important to understand.
Ilya, thanks for covering so much context and so much ground in Eastern European markets. And to our audiences, please stay tuned for part 2 of this exclusive series, where we will be covering developments in the Balkans regions.